explained that this is to defend, to protect the free flow of oil and to assure stability. Those are the technical terms used for aggression and criminal violence, standardly. Well, going back to the UN resolution, did call for stopping the flow of arms into Gaza. In fact, but it also, quote, ensures the sustained reopening of the crossing points on the basis of the 2005 Agreement on Movement and Access between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. Well, what was the 2005 agreement? That determined that the crossings to Gaza would be operated on a continuous basis, that is, never closed, and that Israel would also allow the crossing of goods between Gaza and the West Bank, the two parts of Palestine. In January 2006, the U.S. and Israel abandoned the agreement. That's part of the punishment of Palestinians for voting the wrong way in a free election. We take democracy very seriously here. It must be understood. There's a good deal of sober debate these days on what the attackers hope to achieve. I don't think that's very obscure when we take a brief look at recent history. Israel abandoned Gaza in September 2005. Why? Well, rational Israeli hardliners like Ariel Sharon, as the patron saint of the settler movement, understood that it was senseless to subsidize a few thousand settlers to live illegally, of course, in the ruins of Gaza, protected by a large part of the IDF, the Israeli army, while they took over, used much of the land and the scarce resources of the territory, including its water. It made much more sense to turn Gaza into what's properly been called the world's largest prison, and let the people just rot, and to transfer the settlers to the West Bank, which is much more valuable territory, and they can be subsidized illegally to live there. A couple other places. Israel's quite explicit in its intentions about the West Bank, in word and in deed. The goal is clearly to, and they say it, to annex the arable land. That's the water supplies, the pleasant suburbs of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, all of those that lie within what they call the separation wall and annexation wall. It was declared illegal by the World Court, the U.S. Justice agreeing, but of course that's again irrelevant in outlaw states. The territory to be annexed includes a vastly expanded Jerusalem. That's in violation of Security Council orders that go back 40 years. In addition, Israel will take over, and in fact has been taking over, the Jordan Valley. It's about a third of the West Bank that imprisons what's left. The part that's imprisoned is broken into fragments by settled salients, two major salients that basically trisect the territory, and many other settlements, and hundreds of mostly arbitrary checkpoints, which are designed to make life impossible for the two-headed beasts who may remain and will be like drugged roaches scurrying around in a bottle. I'm quoting the highest Israeli political and military leaders, in this case the revered princes, as they're called. The owners of the land may grant the drugged roaches a few scattered parcels, but that's out of goodwill, not by right. Prime Minister Olmert, as you may recall, addressed a joint session of Congress in May 2006, and to rousing applause and a standing ovation, he said, "I believed and to this day still believe in our people's eternal and historic right to this entire land." the entire land includes at least everything from the Jordan to the sea, and given his background, it may include Jordan as well, to which his party laid claim. He also announced a program for what he called convergence. That's for a program for taking over whatever is valuable in the West Bank, leaving the Palestinians in isolated cantons. Such plans are not new, maybe the details are, but they trace back to the earliest days of the occupation, a few days after the end of the war. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, who among the Israeli leadership is perhaps the most sympathetic to the Palestinian plight, he explained poetically that the situation today resembles the complex relationship between a Bedouin man and a girl he kidnaps against her will. You Palestinians, as a nation, don't want us today, but we'll change your attitude by forcing our presence on you. You will live like dogs, and whoever will leave, and meanwhile we'll take what we want. That's 1967. At the very moment, there was no doubt that these announced policies were criminal. Immediately after the 1967 war, the Israeli government was informed by its highest legal authority, Theodor Meron, well-known international figure in international law. They were informed that civilian settlement in the administered territories, which is what they call them, contravenes the explicit provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention. That's a serious crime. And it's incumbent on all of the high contracting parties, the parties that signed the Geneva Convention, it's incumbent on them to act to prevent such crimes. Of course, they don't do it. The United States not only doesn't do it, but abets the crimes. But again, in an outlaw state, that's an irrelevance, so there's no discussion of it. That's Theodor Meron. He was supported by Israel's justice minister, concurred in his judgment, and the World Court unanimously endorsed that conclusion in its decision in 2004 on the annexation wall. Meanwhile, the Israeli High Court formally agreed with the World Court while disagreeing in its usual convoluted style, if you look at the judgments. In the West Bank, Israel can pursue its criminal programs with U.S. support and with no disturbance. That's thanks to its effective military control, and by now also the cooperation of the collaborationist Palestinian security forces that have been armed and trained by the United States and its allies. It can also carry out regular assassinations and other crimes while the settlers rampage under IDF protection. But while the West Bank has been effectively subdued by terror, there still is resistance in the other half of Palestine, the Gaza Strip. That too has to be quelled for the U.S.-Israeli programs of annexation and destruction of Palestinians to proceed, hence the invasion of Gaza. The timing of the invasion was presumably influenced by the coming Israeli elections. Ehud Barak, who runs the invasion, had been lagging badly in the polls, but one Israeli commentator, Ron HaKohen, in the early days of the slaughter, calculated that for every 40 Arabs killed, Barak gains one parliamentary seat. However, the reasons lie much deeper than winning an election. I think the reasons are those that I mentioned, and they're really on the surface. It doesn't take much insight to perceive them. Well, aggression always has a pretext. In this case, there's a mantra that's endlessly repeated. You've heard it 1,000 times in Israel and the United States and in Europe. And the mantra